Hello everyone, today we are going to be making a good old tier list video. We're going to be checking out every single US state, all 50 of them, and ranking them. But we're not just going to be ranking them based on what I think of them as states. We're going to be ranking them based on their history. So, basically my criteria for this, now when I say based on their history, this could go different ways. What I'm basing these on is the history that happened within the state or from people that came from the state. Basically, stuff like that. How much of an impact that I think that state had on the country and or even the world. Because some states obviously had a lot more impact than others. So depending on how much of an impact they had or how important I think they were to shaping the country, they're going to be higher up on the list. So to avoid this video from being several hours long, I can't spend that long on each of the states. I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of my opinion. Keep in mind, this is my opinion. However, I am going to be looking at statistics and things to help me figure this out. And a lot of this is just from my prior knowledge and or a little bit of research that I've done for this video. Not too much, but without further ado, let's go, baby. Alright, so we are on good old tier maker here. We have, this is a thing somebody made. There's 51 images. We actually included Washington, D.C. on here as well. So, for some reason, we included D.C., but not the other territories. So, I don't know. Well, I don't know much about, like, the Northern Mariana Islands, to be honest. So, that's kind of a good thing. So, the tiers, we have S, A, B, C, D, and F. Obviously, S is the best. F is the worst. S, I would put for the state. I believe this state was the most impactful and had the richest history of all states. And what they did, the country would not be the same without them. That's kind of like the S tier category. And then F tier would be this state had little impact at all. The United States doesn't benefit a whole lot from having them as a state. And just keep in mind, for those of you guys that might get offended, I'm sure I have viewers from all these states, anywhere. Some of you guys might be international. I don't know. But there's probably a lot of you from various states across the Union. And don't get too upset if I rank your state low. This is all my opinion. And if any of you guys want to argue in the comments, that's perfectly fine. So let's get started here. Itchy. Oh boy, so I just kind of did it in the order that we had them here. We're starting off with Texas. Now, Texas, in my opinion, is one of the richest histories of any U.S. state. First of all, Texas started out as not even part of the United States. Texas was its own country. It was called the Republic of Texas. That's why Texas is known as the Lone Star State today. Guys, my nose is itchy. I'm not trying to pick my nose here. I know a lot of you guys might think I'm picking my nose. I'm not. Anyway, Texas is called the Lone Star State because it used to be its own independent country at one point. Once it declared independence from Mexico, originally it was part of Mexico, you get the Alamo, stuff like that. The Alamo is very famous in military history. A lot of people know about the Alamo, but not a lot of people know what the Alamo was. It was part of the Texas Revolution. A lot of people think it was Mexican-American War. No, it's the Texas Revolution. So you get that. Texas also had a great impact in the fact that it produced 3 presidents. We have the Bushes, both Bushes and Lyndon Johnson, and also NASA comes from Texas, Houston specifically. And a lot has gone down in Texas. I think Texas is one of the richest histories of any state in the country. It is also the largest of the 48 continental states. So for those reasons, I'm going to put Texas in A tier. I think Texas has a huge impact on the country. Not as much of a rich history enough to warrant an S tier, in my opinion, just because I think the United States could still flourish and exist without Texas. But so much is there, and it's just had such an impact on this country, and the history is very interesting with the Texas Republic before it was annexed by the United States later on in the 1840s. In the 1830s, it was its own country, which is really interesting. Next up is California. Geez, we're hitting the big ones first up. Okay, California is the second largest of the continental states. California has had a tremendous impact as well, shaping the United States. I think California's got to get an S tier for its history. Now, its history isn't the same as most of the eastern states that we'd call, rich history with the colonial stuff and like that. California got its start a little bit later. The thing that brought most people to California was the gold rush, 1849. That's why San Francisco 49ers are called that today. But California is, first of all, you got Hollywood, which is basically the capital of entertainment in the United States. You also got the gold rush, which is why a lot of people came out there. California was also an independent state in 1846 for a little bit. And its GDP is higher than most countries. California alone would still, if it was its own country today, as far as GDP goes, would be in the top percent of countries worldwide, which is pretty insane. Just California's history has impacted the country a lot, and I think it's very rich in history. No matter what era you go to, California has always been a pretty big deal. And it was the first state that was founded on the West Coast and really allowed for the West Coast to get settled. So you can kind of thank California for all of the other states that were founded later on out in the West, and I think it had a lot of impact compared to most states out in that area. Next up is Alabama. Now, Alabama is an interesting situation. Alabama is... So, first of all, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of Alabama is the Civil Rights Movement, which it had a tremendous part in that with the Montgomery bus boycott, things like that. But also Alabama, you can argue, was a slave state for a while and kind of had a lot of negative impact on the country as far as racism goes and things like that with Jim Crow laws, things like that. So we're kind of in an interesting boat where I have to rank it based on, okay, do I think this was good or bad? Technically, the criteria for this ranking is how much impact did they have, whether or not that was good or bad. There's Fort Mobile in the South, was Civil War, which was pretty significant. Alabama, I think, had a pretty decent impact, but then again, a lot of it was kind of negative. But as far as states go, I think Alabama is probably more middle ranking. I think it played a big part in getting civil rights to go forth there. I think we're going to go and put it in C tier. Okay, I can't be spending too long on these states. Next up is Colorado. Colorado. Okay, as far as history goes, there's not much really in Colorado. I will say that Colorado is known as the Centennial State, which means it was founded in 1876, which was the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. But that's not going to save it from a low tier. Colorado is going to get a low tier. There's not too much happen in Colorado. Yeah, so I mean, there was a couple, Native American massacres, and there was the high school shooting in 1999 in Columbine, but there's not really much to go off of. There was a gold rush there, but California already did the gold rush. Colorado really had not much going on in it. I mean, obviously you have Denver, which was a big, there's a big mint there and stuff that produces money, and it's been doing that for 100 years, but I don't know. I feel like I got to give Colorado, man, it's not really much. There's not much going for it historically, in my opinion. I might give it I don't know. I don't know if I want to give it F or D. It's one of the two, because there's really not much going on in Colorado, but there might be worse options out there. I don't know. Colorado's pretty bad compared to most of these states. Yeah, I'm giving Colorado S tier. I'm sorry, guys. There's not much history in Colorado. You got Denver, but that's about it, really. That's not even really that historic, so I'm sorry. Just so you guys know, this list, the western states are at a complete disadvantage because there's not as much going on in them historically. Obviously, they're Native American stuff, but we don't know much about that stuff. Next up is Connecticut. Connecticut's interesting because obviously Connecticut is the first state we've been ranking that was part of the original 13 colonies. And so Connecticut has, by nature, more of a rich history than most of these states. Particularly, it had a huge impact on the development of our democratic governance in the United States because there was the, what was it called? The Fundamental Orders of 1639, which grants Connecticut its name today as the Constitution State, because it established a kind of a self-governing colony that was similar to what format we'd use in the Constitution later down the line. And that's why Connecticut is kind of had a big impact on this country, and it kind of set the precedent for what the Constitution would become. But other than that, I don't think it's had as much of an impact as most of the other 13 colonies. So I'm going to give Connecticut, I mean, the Constitution's a big deal, but the Constitution built ideas off the Connecticut governance fundamental order, but I don't think it was solely that. And so I'm going to give Connecticut a B tier, probably. I think is where I put it. I think I put it above Alabama, but that's probably about all I'm going to say in that. Oh, and Yale University, one of the most prestigious colleges in the country, is in New Haven, Connecticut. So that's pretty impactful as well. All right, we're moving on to Delaware. So Delaware is another one of those 13 colonies. And in fact, Delaware was actually the very first state to ratify the Constitution after it was written in 1787. So Delaware holds the title of the first state. So Delaware is technically the first state, although it wasn't the first, colonized. Delaware is... I don't think it's really as good as most of the colonies. I think really its real only claim to fame is the fact that it is the first state. Yeah, there's not much other than that for Delaware that really played that much of a role. So Delaware, I mean, that's kind of a cool fact, and for that, I think it at least gets a C. But it's probably just going to get a C because there's not really much else going on in Delaware. I think if it wasn't for the fact that it was the first state, probably would have been a D, even though it was one of the original colonies, but the Delaware colony wasn't that big a deal compared to other colonies like Virginia or Pennsylvania or those that actually had a lot more of an impact. Next up is Florida. Florida's interesting because Florida, for most of early history in the United States, was actually owned by Spain. But Florida's an interesting one. So obviously you get a lot of Native American wars that happened, the Seminole. Florida was the first state actually settled on in the United States. It was the first discovered. It was discovered back in the 1400s by Spanish explorers, and then it was settled in 1565 at St. Augustine. And so I think Florida's got a really rich history in that sense. It's also, I don't know, it's just a really unique state. I think I'm going to give it an A tier for its history, as it is the oldest state. For that reason, I think it's up there. Next up is Georgia. Now, Georgia is interesting as well. Georgia probably had more to do with civil rights than even Alabama did. A lot of these southern states, I'm going to be talking about civil rights because that's just what most of them had their impact on. Now, Georgia was obviously a slave state. It was part of the Confederate States of America, but before that it was one of the original 13 colonies, and it was the furthest south of the 13 colonies. It is named after King George II, which George II has amazing hair, by the way. For those of you guys that don't know George II, he's freaking beautiful. I'm not really into men, but man, he's got some nice hair. It was probably a wig though. Anyway, Georgia produced Martin Luther King Jr. in Atlanta, which that's very big. So I think Georgia overall, also Jimmy Carter's from Georgia. We had a president from there. I think Georgia's had a pretty solid impact on the country. I don't know if I want to put it in A or B, because other than those two things, wasn't really much. I do think it should be probably up there, though. I think I'm going to... It's tough. I think I might go with B for Georgia. Yeah. It also... Yeah, it's got a lot of agriculture there, too. There's stuff that grows there more than any other place in the world. So, yeah, I think Georgia's probably... I feel like A is too high. A is too high. It's going to be B. Georgia just... Yeah. I mean, Martin Luther King obviously was from Georgia, but he didn't do... Most of his things didn't happen in Georgia. So, I think I'm just going to put it in B. I think that's where I need to put it. Hawaii is freaking awesome. Hawaii's going to be an S tier for me, because, as far as its history goes, because it has such a unique history compared to most states in the country. Hawaii, for generations, was inhabited by a Pacific Island tribe, indigenous culture that actually had a kingdom there. If you've ever heard of Queen Liliuokalani, who we overthrew, the United States overthrew when they annexed Hawaii. But it was originally settled by James Cook way back in the 1700s. So we had a huge colonial impact for several centuries before the United States got a hold of it in the late 1800s. You also have the Hawaii volcanoes, the national park happened there. The Pearl Harbor was stationed there, which was basically our access to the Pacific and the station of the Pacific Fleet. Oliver, why are you yelling? And so, obviously, it was attacked, bringing us into World War II. So I think Hawaii's had a tremendous impact. And it's got such an interesting history. If you guys ever want to dive into it, we should do a video on that sometime. Man, it's really interesting. Moving on to Ohio. Now, Ohio is also going to be an S tier. And you guys might be surprised by that. But Ohio has had a huge impact on the United States. I feel like I keep using the word impact, but that's kind of what the criteria is here. Ohio, first of all, was the first state to be admitted from the Northwest Territory. And it was the first state ever, besides the original 13 colonies, the 13 colonial territories, to be admitted as a state. It was the fourth state after the Constitution. The first three were Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vermont. But those were pieced from other states. Obviously, Vermont, well, was its own country, but it was kind of already part of the 13 colonies in a way, but it was kind of its own little independent thing. And then Kentucky was part of Virginia, and Tennessee was part of North Carolina before. But Ohio was part of the Northwest Territory. A lot goes down in Native American history in Ohio because it was part of the Ohio country. The French had occupied it during the French and Indian War. Before that, you had Tecumseh was from Ohio. All the Northwest Indian War, that stuff happened there. And that is a tremendous impact. It had a tremendous impact on the War of 1812, things like that. Ohio has produced 7 or arguably 8 presidents were from Ohio, or at least lived in Ohio for most of their life. And so that's a very big impact as well. Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, was from Ohio. Thomas Edison was from Ohio. The Wright brothers were from Ohio. The Rockefeller Standard Oil Company was in Cleveland. The NFL started in Ohio. Ohio, I mean, it's the heart of it all. That's what they say in Ohio. That's what they call it. It's had a crazy impact. A lot of people don't realize that, but Ohio is an essential state. A lot of people, like to joke about, but Ohio has had a huge impact on this country. It's also had a huge impact on the meme world, I guess, too, you could say. So, yeah, Ohio's got to be an S tier. Why are you yelling? Oh, Oliver's stuck in my... I didn't know you were in my room.
Scary head ranks states.
You're going to rank some with me. All right, Washington, D.C., Oliver. Okay, Washington, D.C. is also good. There's too many S's, man. Oh, my gosh. I'm putting too many states in S tier, I think. Okay, it doesn't matter. You can't put Washington, D.C. in anything besides S tier. It's the capital of the country. Everything is there. Everything the country stands for is in Washington, D.C. Everything that we have, our government is there. It's got a rich history. It's named after the first president, George Washington. All the museums are there. Dude, it's had a crazy impact on the country. Every decision that's made at the federal level takes place in Washington, D.C. I don't think Washington, D.C. deserves anything besides an S tier. Next up is Wisconsin. So Wisconsin was also part of that Northwest Territory. It's in the Great Lakes region of the country. The biggest impact that Wisconsin had, in my opinion, was it was actually the state where the Republican Party was formed, which was originally the anti-slave party, but now it's become to be one of the 2 major political parties in the country, and obviously that's had a huge impact. Also, Wisconsin was the first state to outlaw job discrimination based on disability. Also notable for its cheese and dairy industries and things like that. So Wisconsin, although it didn't have a tremendous impact, I think for a Midwest state, it probably is about middle of the range. The C tier is kind of going for states that have like one thing about them that was good, and the rest not. Next up is Arkansas. Arkansas, I'm also going to give a B because Arkansas had, it's going to be tough. Ooh, boy, Arkansas might be an A. Okay, Arkansas produced Walmart, guys, and that is absolutely huge. Also, Bill Clinton was from Arkansas, so we had a president from Arkansas. It's tough between B and A. I'm going to go B because I don't think Arkansas has as rich of a history as states like Florida, Texas. stuff like that. So I think Arkansas is going to be a B tier, but it's very impactful still. It just didn't have as much as the other states, as much of a rich history, if that makes any sense. Moving on to Idaho. Ooh, Idaho's interesting. Yeah, not too much going on in Idaho, unfortunately. I'm going to probably have to give Idaho an F. Obviously, it's known for its potatoes, stuff like that, but there's other places that did potatoes as well. And unfortunately, for those of you guys who live in Idaho, I'm sorry, there just isn't too much historic going on in Idaho. There was a gold rush there. It was settled by a lot of missionaries is kind of how it started. But yeah, not too much going on in Idaho. Moving on to Iowa. Now, Iowa is interesting. I think is actually the state that invented the tractor, which was obviously very influential for agriculture and things like that. But other than that, I don't know too much about what happened in Iowa. I don't know. I'm kind of torn. I'm going to go with D. Yeah, Iowa, not too much going on with you. I'm sorry, Iowa. Next up is Kansas. Kansas is probably about C tier for me. Because Kansas, okay, so first of all, you had Bleeding Kansas, which is the biggest thing that I lean towards when I think about Kansas history. Right before the Civil War happened, there was Franklin Pierce signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which made it so that this was a big issue for most of the early first half of the 19th century was the slavery issue and whether or not slavery should expand into the new territories. And so Franklin Pierce is like, okay, let's just let and most people in government at the time agreed with this, let's just let the state decide on if it wants to have slaves or not, if it wants to be a slave state or a free state. And so everybody came into Kansas to vote it in or out, and it led to fighting, which a lot of people consider the first kind of battle of the Civil War. But that was like in the 1850s, so that was few years before the Civil War eventually broke out. But I don't consider that, but that's just an interesting fact. Also, Kansas was a big proprietor of the Indian reserves after, not as much as Oklahoma was, which we'll get to Oklahoma later, but a lot of Native Americans were forced to go out to the west after the Indian Removal Act, and some of them ended up in Kansas, some of them ended up in Oklahoma. I think Tenskwatawa, who was the prophet during the War of 1812, he died in Kansas. But other than that, Kansas, I don't know if there's too much going on there, but I think those two are really cool facts about a state that's also out there. Oh, also Dwight D. Eisenhower was from there as well. It is buried there. So, pretty cool for Kansas. I'll give it a C tier. Next up is Kentucky. Kentucky's interesting as well. I think Kentucky's going to go, the bluegrass state, the birthplace of bourbon, stuff like that. Ooh. I'll give it an A tier. Also, it's known for horse racing, stuff like that. A lot of Kentucky. So there was a lot of vice presidents from Kentucky. You had Henry Clay, who actually wasn't vice president, but Henry Clay was from Kentucky. A lot of vice presidents: Richard Mentor Johnson, Alvin Barkley, people like that. Daniel Boone got his start in Kentucky. It played a big role in early westward expansion because Kentucky was one of really the first state that was settled outside of the original 13 colonies. That people had living on it before it became a state, because there were already people in Kentucky by the time they declared independence. And so Kentucky, coal miners, things like that, a lot of that happened there. Kentucky's had a really big history. It's one of the oldest states as well. And so I think Kentucky probably deserves an A tier. I'm not sure. It's kind of tough between A and B for me, because I feel like it's had about the same impact as some of these states. Shoot, what I forgot to mention about Kentucky, Jefferson Davis and Abe Lincoln were born in Kentucky. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. I don't know why I didn't mention that earlier, but that's a pretty big deal as well. Kentucky has a lot of stuff going on. I think it's up there on the list of influential states. Next up is Maryland. Now, Maryland obviously was one of the original 13 colonies. Maryland is one of the biggest things about it was where the bombing of Fort McHenry happened during the War of 1812, which is where the national anthem was written. So Maryland's probably got to be about a B as well. John Wilkes Booth was from Maryland, who was, the guy who shot Abraham Lincoln. But yeah, that was kind of another fact there. But yeah, Maryland, probably about a B tier. It was an original colony, so it's got a lot of history there, being history dating back to the 1600s, things like that. But that's what that is. Massachusetts, ooh boy, Massachusetts had a big part in the American Revolution. So obviously, ooh boy, Boston, Massachusetts, so much going on there. That's basically where the American Revolution started, and you could argue the whole reason the United States is a country today is because of Massachusetts. Obviously, Harvard's there. I feel like I gotta give it an A. I don't think it's had as much of an impact as some of these other places, or as much of a rich history as some of these places. Now it's got Plymouth as well. Plymouth started in Massachusetts. Massachusetts got to be S. Yeah, man, there's nothing wrong with having a lot of S's, guys. I probably should have been a little more, use that a little more sparingly, but we're going to have a lot more S's than we do anything else. I think I might move Hawaii down to A. Yeah, I'm going to move Hawaii down because I think Hawaii actually didn't have as much of a history connected to the United States as it did with other places. So I'll probably give Hawaii an A to kind of even out the rankings here. But Massachusetts has got to be an S tier. Boston Tea Party, Boston Massacre, the Battle of Bunker Hill, all these places that were the start and what started the American Revolution, all took place in Massachusetts. Most of the American Revolution, which a lot of people don't realize, is the American Revolution was actually kind of a divided topic at the time, kind of a divided issue. A lot of people in the colonial United States were loyalists to the British Crown, but there were only certain areas and certain people that were actually wanted to start the revolution, and Massachusetts was one of those places. And I would argue maybe without Massachusetts playing such a bigger role, the American Revolution might not have happened at all, or might not have even happened, or probably not to such a big scale as it would have. And without Massachusetts, I don't think we even get independence, because I don't think the movement would have been big enough for us to have won the war. And so you can kind of thank Massachusetts in a way for the start of the United States. Now, that might sound like a stretch to most people, but you can't deny that Massachusetts had a huge impact on this country, especially early on. Next up is going to be Mississippi. Mississippi's interesting. Mississippi had a big role, just like Alabama, for civil rights, things like that. Other than that, though, there's not really much else going on in Mississippi. So I'll probably put it in a D. Let me know. I feel like there's something I'm missing. If there's something really big that you guys can think of about Mississippi, put it in there. But I think it's going to be a D for me, because I don't really think there's too much going on in Mississippi there. Too much. I'm going to try to point out one thing here. Yeah, I guess there was the Battle of Vicksburg in the Civil War, that's where Ulysses S. Grant kind of came to fame. But I don't think one Civil War battle saves it from a D tier. Next up is Missouri. So Missouri has the claim to fame from the Missouri Compromise, which happened in 1820. And Missouri wanted to join the Union as a slave state, which broke the balance. So then they formed Maine, and so on and so forth. Every state that happened, there was going to be another. Every free state, there'd be another slave state. Every slave state, there'd be another free state. But that didn't even really happen. And that's kind of the impact that Missouri had. Missouri, other than that, I think it's probably one of the more middle-of-the-road states as far as history goes. I don't think there's really too much other than that there. I might throw it... Yeah, it's probably about the same as Kansas for that reason. I'll probably give it a C tier. Montana is up. Now, Montana, not too much there as well. Montana did have the Battle of Little Bighorn, and was one of the biggest resistances for Native Americans during the Great Sioux War and the Native American Wars, the Indian Wars. So I think it had kind of an impact on that. But other than that, I don't think there's a whole lot going on in Montana. I do think that is an interesting history for the Native Americans. But it's probably going to be a C, because there's not too much other than that in Montana. Montana is one of the least populated states. That's probably about all I'd say for Montana. Nebraska is up. Now, Nebraska is where Gerald Ford was born, birthplace of President Gerald Ford. Nebraska is also the only state today with a unicameral legislature, which means it only has a one-house Congress. All the other states have a 2-house Congress. They have a General Assembly and a Senate. Nebraska's only got 1 Congress, which is 1-house Congress, which is really interesting. So Nebraska, I mean, I don't really know what else is going on in Nebraska. There's not really too much else. It's probably going to be a D, honestly. I think it's kind of cool for those reasons, but there isn't too much there. You know, you get the Homestead Act, you know, things like that. Pretty cool, I guess, but there's a lot of other states you can point to that too. You can't really point to one state for the Homestead Act. Next up is Nevada. So Nevada is big, unlike a lot of the areas out there, on silver, stuff like that. It's also the location of the Hoover Dam. Nevada, also you got Las Vegas, things like that. I think Nevada is probably going to be another middle-of-the-road state as far as history goes. There's some good stuff there, but not enough to really stand out, and I think the United States could work without Nevada's existence, although Nevada has definitely still had a pretty good impact. Next up is New Jersey. New Jersey's pretty fascinating. So obviously, it was one of the 13 colonies. Its capital, its capital. My name's Trenton. That's why the capital is Trenton, New Jersey. New Jersey, you also have Princeton there. A lot of Revolutionary War battles. Well, the crossing of the Delaware took place in New Jersey, which kind of the turning point in the war. Some people say Saratoga was, but the Battle of Trenton definitely was as well. And New Jersey, you know, it's got a lot of history. There's a lot going on in New Jersey. It's also the most densely populated state of all of them. So I think New Jersey probably gets about a D in the grand scheme of things. It is one of the colonies, and so it's going to be there for that reason as well. Next up is New Mexico. Now, New Mexico is pretty cool. New Mexico is one of the oldest states out in that area. It was founded around 1610 by the Spanish coming down the Rio Grande River. There was also the Pueblo Native Americans, which were the interesting tribe that built towns and cliffs and stuff, which is kind of interesting. Other than that, New Mexico was relatively late in joining the Union. It wasn't until about 1912 that New Mexico joined the United States. So I don't think it's really had that much of a history, but it's had definitely a lot of history if you go back far, which it's got a more of a further back history than most of these other states. So I'm going to give it probably a B tier. Santa Fe, very old city. Next up is New York. Okay, New York. Okay. Cannot put New York in S tier. All right. New York, obviously, originally founded by the Dutch back in the 1600s. New York used to be called New Amsterdam. New York has had a tremendous impact on this country. It's the largest New York City, which is technically in New York. Kind of New Jersey has a lot of suburbs in it, but New York City. Wow. It was the center for world trade at one point. The Empire State Building was the tallest building in the world at one point. A lot of the steel industry. So much has gone on in New York. There's so much in New York. There's too much to talk about in New York. Everybody knows how much of an impact New York's had on the country, and it's one of the original colonies as well, and was one of the biggest states. I think it was the second largest of the colonies next to Virginia, obviously. But we can't not put New York in S tier. Next up is North Carolina. So North Carolina, I mentioned the Wright brothers were from Ohio, but they actually flew their first flight in North Carolina, Kitty Hawk. So North Carolina kind of takes the cake for the birthplace of aviation, at least where it happened. North Carolina was also one of the original 13 colonies. And North Carolina is where I was thinking of something. Oh, also, the first English settlement was in North Carolina, the lost colony of Roanoke. It wasn't the original permanent settlement. It wasn't the first permanent settlement. That was Jamestown in Virginia in 1607. But in the 1580s, North Carolina actually had the first ever English settlement. So that's pretty cool. I think those two things had enough of an impact for North Carolina to get a B tier in this ranking. Next up is going to be North Dakota. Okay, North Dakota, I'm sorry, there's just nothing. There's nothing there. There's just nothing in North Dakota. I think North Dakota is probably beautiful. but there's really not much going on there. I think there was a gold rush there. There was Native American wars, but that's not really unique. That happened in a lot of states. Yeah, sorry, North Dakota. I don't think there's much going on with you. Next up is Oregon. Now, Oregon, obviously you got the Oregon Trail, but the Oregon Trail was a bunch of different states, so I don't really know how much of that I can really put on Oregon. Other than that, Oregon didn't have a whole lot going on. It had a couple settlements early on out in the Pacific Northwest and kind of planted the seeds for that. But I think Oregon, for the most part, didn't have a whole lot going on. You could argue the Oregon Trail was a thing. It was, again, pointing to Homestead, things like that. Also, Lewis and Clark, things like that out in Oregon. But they didn't even end up in Oregon. They ended up in Washington at the end of it. So they were in Oregon at one point. So Oregon really didn't have too much going on. I don't think there were a few Civil War skirmishes as well. It's kind of hard to say. I'll probably give it a D. I think it's about the same level as Iowa, Mississippi, things like that. So we're going to throw Oregon in D tier. Next up is going to be, this is Pennsylvania. Jeez, I don't know why I couldn't think of it. Pennsylvania's right here. Pennsylvania has had a really staunch impact as well. I'm probably going to give Pennsylvania an A tier, okay? So first of all, let's not deny that Pennsylvania has the city of Philadelphia, which Philadelphia is where the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, all that stuff happened there. All of the founding documents, they all took place in Philadelphia. That's where Ben Franklin was from, all this stuff. It was one of the original 13 colonies. Pennsylvania's always been, it's always had an impact. It's always been one of the largest swing states in elections and things like that, especially this last time around. Pennsylvania's kind of always been a big player in the United States. It's also the steel industry was the largest in Pittsburgh. It's where Andrew Carnegie had that, Carnegie, whatever you want to call him. So Pittsburgh's had a big impact. So between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, geez, lots happened in Pennsylvania. Also, the French and Indian War, a lot of the stuff that happened there, Fort Necessity, Dukins, all that was in Pennsylvania as well. So big impact of the French and Indian War as well. So Pennsylvania's got a lot of rich history there. A lot still that I need to check out there in Pennsylvania. Do some videos on things like that. Next up is, oh boy, is that Rhode Island? I think that's Rhode Island. Yeah, it looks like it. Rhode Island is the smallest state in the Union. It was one of the original 13 colonies. It was actually the last of the original 13 colonies to ratify the Constitution. Other than that, I don't think there's really a whole lot going on in Rhode Island. Unfortunately for Rhode Island, there's not too much that really sticks out. But I'll probably give it, since it is one of the original colonies, I got to give it at least a C tier. I guess. I mean, is it even? I guess it's going to be a D. I don't think there's too much really going on in Rhode Island. They're not really, yeah, I don't know. I don't got anything against it. It's just not very cool. It's just kind of like the smallest state, and yeah, it was one of the original states, which is cool, but other than that, not much. Another one of the original 13 colonies, we have South Carolina. South Carolina is very mixed bag when it comes to history, because South Carolina is notoriously, kind of probably holds the title for most rebellious state in the Union. South Carolina was the first state to secede during the Civil War and kind of founded the Confederacy. Also, it almost seceded back in the 1830s and 1820s during the nullification crisis after the Tariff of Abominations, things like that. So South Carolina, I don't know if you count that as good or bad. It's definitely had an impact. But those are the two big things that South Carolina has going for it. It is one of the original states. It's also kind of where the Civil War began. So I guess I'll give it a C for that, because it definitely has a history, but it's kind of a mixed history. So I'll give it a C. I think that makes the most sense. Next up is going to be South Dakota. South Dakota had Mount Rushmore. Oh yeah, it was the Wounded Knee Massacre, so that was kind of an embarrassment as well. Other than that, South Dakota really hasn't had much. I'll probably give it a D. I think it's got a little more to do than North Dakota does, but still not really a whole lot going on there. Tennessee is up. Tennessee has, okay, Tennessee, this can also be North Carolina as well. I failed to mention the Cherokee Trail of Tears that happened with the Indian Removal Act in North Carolina and Tennessee. That was kind of sad. Actually, very sad. I don't know why I said kinda. But Tennessee, it's got Nashville, which has a big impact on the music industry in the United States. It's also one of the oldest states. It's like the second oldest or the third oldest state after the 13 colonies. I think it was founded in like 1796. It was the 16th state or whatever. So yeah, Tennessee's got a lot there. There's a lot of cool stuff historically going on in Tennessee. Nothing too rich, however, so I'm probably just going to give it a C tier. Although I do think it's had a huge impact with Memphis and Nashville and those kind of places. There's a good amount there. Also, James Polk is from Tennessee and Andrew Jackson, who were presidents. So pretty cool. Andrew Jackson's plantation was there, so that's kind of neat as well. You guys know how I feel about Andrew Jackson. I don't really care for him too much, but I do think that Tennessee, he had an impact, so we're going to put it there anyway. Next up is Utah. Now, Utah, I think, was kind of a larger player as far as out west goes compared to most states out west that don't have much of a rich history. Utah was where the Transcontinental Railroad was first put into place, which is a very big deal because that was really the first way of transporting things from the western part of the United States to the eastern part of the United States, because back then there wasn't too much of a way to get out there quick. And so obviously Utah, you have the Mormon movement, stuff like that. So Utah's got a decent amount there. I think it's had a pretty good impact on people. So I'll probably give Utah a C as well. I think those are some pretty big moves, especially compared to most states out there. I think Utah, pretty decent there. Next up is Vermont. Vermont was, like I said, its own country at one point. There's a few presidents from that area. You got Calvin Coolidge and Chester Arthur. Pretty cool. Vermont, though, probably just a C again. I don't think there's too much that really sticks out about Vermont. And no, I think Vermont, it's probably about the same as those states in C tier. It's going to be just there. I mean, it's cool that it was its own country, but other than that, really not a whole lot. I'm going to talk about it because I don't really know much else that sticks out. Next up is Virginia. Virginia. Ooh, oh boy, I want to put this in S. I don't know if I want to. Virginia's had a rich history. The entire British settlement in America started in Virginia. Virginia was the largest state of the original colonies because back then it consisted of all of Kentucky and West Virginia as well, which West Virginia is the next state. Virginia was also the capital of the Confederate States of America in Richmond. It is where it's where George Washington's from. It's where Thomas Jefferson's from. James Madison. Virginia has produced all of these statesmen that basically shaped our nation, shaped the nation. So Virginia, man, it's had just as much of an impact as Massachusetts and Ohio have had. Virginia's probably going to be an S tier. I freaking love Virginia. It's an amazing state. It's got such a rich history, even though some of its history may not be good history. But I think it's going to be there. West Virginia is up. West Virginia, definitely less than Virginia, but I think West Virginia's got a decent history. It first started because that part of Virginia west of the Appalachian Mountains didn't want to join the Confederacy, even though it still had slaves. So they're like, okay, Virginia's going to join the Confederacy, so we'll just form our own state, West Virginia. So West Virginia, you get the legend of the Mothman. Okay, that's kind of stupid. I don't think I'm going to put that up there for that, but there ain't too much going on in West Virginia. High poverty state, unfortunately. Coal mines, things like that. I think West Virginia's got a pretty unique history when you really look into it, but it's probably, in the grand scheme of things, a C tier as well. Next up is Wyoming. Wyoming has not too much there. Native American stuff, the Cheyenne, the Yellowstone National Park, which was the first national park, which is pretty cool. But Wyoming, as far as grand scheme of things, probably going to be a D tier as far as history, because most of its parks and things are just natural. They're not really history per se. So Wyoming's probably going to get a D tier. It's also the least populated state in the country, about 500,000 or 600,000 people. For a state that's very big size is kind of crazy. Yeah, and when there's some states that have over 10 million, that's not too many. Next up is Alaska. Alaska's cool, in my opinion. Well, literally, it's pretty cool. I'm going to give Alaska an A tier. And Alaska has had... Alaska, so first of all, it was owned by Russia. And we purchased it in the 1860s. Andrew Johnson did, or William Seward, Secretary of State at the time. He purchased Alaska from Russia. And if you think about it, what do you think... It's kind of interesting to think about what the world would look like today if Russia still owned Alaska. But anyway, that's that thing. Alaska, for me, the biggest thing that I think is really cool is Alaska's nickname it's known as the last frontier, because a lot of Alaska still to this day hasn't really been settled and really discovered. And so there's a lot in Alaska that we don't really know about. There's really unique Native American tribes in Alaska that really didn't exist in much other places, and it's not connected to the other states, and it's also the largest state, and I think Alaska has a really compelling history that we don't know about, and I think the mystery of it all kind of warrants it to be up in A tier. I know I'm kind of all over the place with these rankings, if you think I am. It just kind of depends on my opinion on what the history means, to my opinion. Kind of weird thing. I didn't do this a lot. There's not like a statistical ranking or anything. This is just like kind of what I think. I think Alaska's got a really compelling history. Maybe it hasn't had much of a rich history that's been documented as such states like Georgia or North Carolina. But I think the mystery of it all and the uniqueness of it, kind of like Hawaii and Florida and Texas, is kind of what gives it the A tier. Next up is Arizona. Arizona, I don't know. Probably an F. There's really not much going on historically in Arizona. Obviously, it's one of the most impactful states today. But yeah, I don't know. Gadsden Purchase. I mean, it used to be part of Mexico. The Gadsden Purchase was so insignificant. I'm not going to give it a D for that. Yeah, sorry, Arizona. I'm going to put you an F. I know there's a lot of people watching this video that might be from Arizona, but you don't got much history there. Next up is Illinois. Illinois is the land of the Lincoln. That's pretty cool. It's also got Chicago, huge impact. Illinois I think is really cool. Really cool state. It had the... I'm missing something. There's something else about Illinois. But Illinois' got to be a B tier, I think. It's where Abraham Lincoln got his start. It was really the furthest west that people got before the Louisiana Purchase. It was part of the Northwest Territory, so it was a frontier for a long time in the early parts of history. I think it's shaped a lot of our country today. So Illinois is going to be in B tier, I think. Pretty cool there. Next up is Indiana. Indiana, the site of the Battle of Tippecanoe. Indiana, you got the Indy 500. You got all this stuff. Indiana's pretty sweet. A lot of vice presidents from Indiana. I'm probably going to give Indiana a C tier, though. There are so many vice presidents from Indiana. In the cemetery in Indianapolis alone, there's 3 vice presidents buried there. Thomas Riley Marshall, Charles Fairbanks, and Thomas Hendricks. Also, Benjamin Harrison, president. He did a lot in Indiana as well. So, Indiana, pretty cool. It's also where Fort Wayne is. It played a big impact during the war against the Shawnees during the War of 1812, things like that. So, definitely there. Next up is Louisiana. Louisiana is pretty cool. Louisiana is very cool. I'm going to give B to Louisiana. Louisiana has a different history from most other places. First of all, it was originally a French settlement, and a lot of people down there still speak French, especially in New Orleans. You had major events like Hurricane Katrina. You had the Battle of New Orleans. You had the Louisiana Purchase, which that was more Louisiana territory than Louisiana State, but still named after it. A lot of stuff there. There's the whole the jazz stuff in Louisiana. So Louisiana's pretty cool. Louisiana is very cool. I'm gonna give it a B tier. Next up is Maine. Maine, probably middle of the road for me. I don't know why this is freezing up. Yeah, Maine, not too much. I mean, Maine's cool. Definitely had a lot of. It used to be part of Massachusetts, so I guess you could kind of say that, but it's not really like that. It was added after Missouri was added, but it's probably should get the same tier as Missouri, in my opinion. There were a few people from Maine, like, Hannibal Hamlin, vice president to Lincoln. There were a few people. There was the 20th Maine Regiment during the Civil War, which they were the famous regiment at Little Round Top at Gettysburg. I don't know what made me think of that, but yeah, that's pretty neat right there. So yeah, Maine, probably just middle of the road. It's got some neat little facts, but nothing crazy. Next up is Michigan. Michigan's had a profound impact as well. Michigan's got to be an A tier. Michigan was originally French as well. The French came in 1701, founded the city of Detroit. Also in Detroit, you have Henry Ford and the Ford Automotive Company, which is very influential, obviously, that the automobiles in the United States, the first affordable car. It is, that's very impactful. Also, you had, I mentioned Gerald Ford was born in Nebraska, but he was really from Michigan, so you could kind of point at that. There's a president from Michigan. Also, it's just always been kind of unique. It's got a unique history compared to most states. So, but yeah, Ford alone definitely puts it in A tier because that is revolutionary right there. Next up is Minnesota. Minnesota, there's not too much in Minnesota. I mean, a lot of it, part of it used to be part of the Northwest Territory. I don't know why I keep talking about the Northwest Territory, but I do, because I like the Northwest Territory, so don't judge me. But yeah, there's really not a whole lot going on in Missouri and Minnesota. I can't really think of too much that sticks out, but I don't think it's really, you know what, it's probably going to be an F tier. Yeah, sorry, Minnesota. You're going to be an F tier for me. Next up is New Hampshire. New Hampshire, okay, New Hampshire was one of the 13 colonies. It's part of New England today. I don't think it's really that big a deal compared to most of the original 13 colonies. It didn't really have too much going on with it, such as states like, Virginia or New York or things like that. But it's probably middle of the road. Probably about where Delaware's at. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, next up is Oklahoma. Oklahoma, okay. Big thing with Oklahoma is the Indian reserves, which I mentioned earlier, were on the last two states. That's where most of the Native Americans were pushed out to, was Oklahoma. And that's where a lot of them still live there today. So I don't know if I want to point that as a good history or a bad history. Other than that, they did find gold there and things, but a lot of western states have gold. I think Oklahoma's definitely had an impact, and I think it's probably going to be, I'm kind of torn between C and B. Probably a B. It's probably about the same as some of those states. That's obviously there, but it's not, I don't know. It's not too positive in my opinion. Next was Washington. Washington State, obviously named after the first president, George Washington. It's at the top left corner in the Pacific Northwest. It's where Lewis and Clark finished their journey and reached the Pacific. So that's pretty cool there. Washington's probably also going to get a C tier. Probably a D tier. I don't think there's really too much else there. Yeah. I think that's going to be the list, guys. That is my opinion on the rankings of all of the 50 states plus Washington, D.C., and their impact on the country. Their histories, in my opinion, ranked. So this is kind of a cool little video. Let me know what you guys think, what you agree and disagree with. Let me know if there's something that I missed, which I'm sure there is, because there's a lot to go on. You just can't know everything about every state. But, I think I got a pretty good grasp of American history, And it also proved to me how little I know about some of these states. I thought I knew a lot about states, but some of these I don't know a whole lot about them. And so there's room to learn, which is good. But yeah, so that's kind of my opinion on all the states' history. If there's something you disagree with, feel free to start a conversation in the comments or whatever you want to do. We encourage that here, healthy arguments, things like that. So that's cool. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Let me know what you think the richest history of any state is in the country. And I will see you guys next time. Goodbye. Wah!